When you look back at any era, you can distinctly see the changes in car design. From the chrome accents of the 50s to the boxy angles of the 80s, each decade has its unique style. But every so often, designers do a throwback. They pull inspiration from the past. We got a wave of this in the mid-2000s. The S197 Mustang, the PT Cruiser, the Prowler, the SSR, the HHR, and many more drew inspiration from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. For better or for worse, this was a serious trend, and the term used to describe this style is retrofuturism. Now, it seems to be happening again. Today's cars that aren't boring nondescript silhouettes of the same thing are taking some specific styling cues from the past. And if 2004 was looking back 40 years to the 60s, 2024 seems to be looking back 40 years to the 80s. But is recycling the past really the best way to get people to buy new cars? We're going to take the plunge into the boomer boom of retrofuturism, this new synthwave version, and why it may not be as rad as it feels. Let's start with where this whole retrofuturism thing began, and that was actually in 1997 when commercials came out for this little guy. The original Volkswagen Beetle had been an absolute icon in the automotive industry for decades. Even though it technically started production in 1938 under Nazi Germany, by the 1960s it was an icon of peace, love, and being just too natural to shower.
I can't help it, I'm self-conscious, man.
By 1965, VW was making 1.6 million Beetles a year. It had not only become the car of the people, it transcended being of a time to something that was a constant in people's lives. And the original Beetle actually stayed in production in Mexico until 2003. So when VW launched this redesigned version, the first time the Beetle had been drastically re-engineered in its 60-year history, people took notice. Of course, plenty of car designs had taken inspiration from the past already, but no one had ever futurified a vehicle as universal as the Beetle. Every other car gradually changes throughout the decades, but the old Beetle and the new Beetle feel like two completely different eras, even though they were technically in production at the same time. Also, unlike other cars, these two shared absolutely no parts and really no mechanical concepts either, other than the fact that they were both round. Nevertheless, the public ate up the new Beetle. It didn't matter that the car was now front-wheel drive, front-engine, and water-cooled. It was a cheap and accessible way to express your uniqueness, even if there were 100,000 more on the road just like it every year. It seems like after seeing the success of selling a car on nostalgia, the big three set out to do the same, because over the next 7 years, we got about a dozen retro-future designs harkening back to the American Golden Age. 2001 saw the launch of the Chrysler PT Cruiser. The designer Brian Nesbitt was heavily influenced by the Chrysler Airflow of the 1940s, but it was also offered with things like wood paneling, two-tone paint, and pinstriping, as though it was cherry-picking a greatest hits album of American styling. Okay, greatest hits might be relative, but you get my point. Even though Chrysler says that the PT Cruiser was aimed at a younger audience, it actually succeeded with an older generation, the ones who were nostalgic for the styling cues of the vehicle. Not long after that, Ford launched the 11th gen Thunderbird. Over the years, the Thunderbird had morphed into a drab box of a car before it was discontinued in 1997. But in 2002, we got a sleek and flashy throwback to the 1950s style, complete with chrome accents and porthole windows. And this trend of replicating the style of an American heyday continued on with varying degrees of success. The Mustang S197 launched to amazing fanfare, but the Chevy SSR and HHR weren't exactly well received. Not every design element translates across decades well, and it could even be argued that some of these designs were copying an era, not the good parts of an era. And it wasn't just the US jumping on this throwback bandwagon. Toyota took a swing in 2006 with the launch of the FJ Cruiser, a two-door SUV inspired by the mighty 40 Series Land Cruiser, one of the best vehicles to come out of 60s Japan. But the other half of the 1-2 punch that cemented this transition from then to now was the BMW-designed Mini Cooper. Like the Volkswagen Beetle, the Mini Cooper had reached heights of over 1 million units per year since its original launch in 1961 with the Morris Company. The Mini brand has gone through many changes on the corporate side, but the identity of the vehicle has remained the same: small, light, British. In 2001, the Mini Cooper was relaunched by BMW after having bought the brand name from Rover. Even though this was technically now a German hatchback, it not only played off the classic Mini styling cues, but the heritage as well. Mini Coopers were available with Union Jack roofs, Union Jack taillights, and mirrors. The scrappy little British racer that had won the Monte Carlo rally was back, even though it was over 1,000 pounds heavier than the original and cost as much as a BMW when it came time for repairs. But eventually, this wave of reviving the past died out as automotive technology began to look to the future again. With hybrids on the rise and EVs on the horizon, the vision of an electric future couldn't be based on the past, at least not at first. Now, however, in 2024, we've seen the styling of several EVs start to skew towards this appeal to nostalgia. And it's not nostalgia for the 40s, 50s, and 60s anymore. It's nostalgia for the 80s. In 2021, Hyundai released the Ioniq 5. Hyundai says the boxy, brutal lines of the Ioniq 5 were inspired by South Korea's first mass-produced vehicle, the Hyundai Pony, which ran from 1975 to 1990. But many people say styling cues were giving Lancia Delta vibes. If you're gonna copy someone, copy the best. It's not a revival of the badge or a direct successor like the others we've talked about, but the hint of a style that was beginning to creep in. Hyundai doubled down on this Radwood-era look in 2022 with the launch of their slightly more than a concept car, the Vision 74. Now, I know everyone wants to say that the Tesla Cybertruck is the new DeLorean, but come on, the Vision 74 is definitely more in line with the DMC-12. It even has those rectangular headlights that take you back to the classic steel beam style. But one car is happenstance and two is a coincidence. It's not like every EV has been emulating the 80s, right? Okay, there was that one EV company, Alpha, who announced the truck that looked like it belonged to Marty McFly, but it's basically vaporware at this point, and who knows if it'll ever be built. That's when the announcement of Rivian's new vehicles hit the news cycle. The Rivian R2 and Rivian R3 will be Rivian's mid-size SUV and compact SUV offerings now that the R1T and R1S have been released. Right away, the styling was noticeably boxy, and the R3 in particular feels like a modernized version of an 80s Golf or a Ford Fiesta. But this time, Rivian's designers were upfront about their goals and said out loud that they were inspired by the Lancia Delta. Given that EVs need to be as aerodynamic as possible to keep efficiency up, this was clearly a purposeful choice. Even more recently, Hyundai has applied some 80s Land Rover Discovery styling to their Santa Fe. And across the pond, this trend is continuing. Renault and Alpine announced the A290, an EV that takes direct inspiration from their 80s icon, the Renault 5 Turbo. And Fiat's new Grande Panda looks like the headlights could run Pong. So, the big question is, are we about to hit a boom of 80s-inspired cars in the same way that we got a boom of 60s-inspired cars in the mid-2000s? It's very possible. I mean, selling new cars by likening them to things that were on the road when you were a kid is a powerful way to speak to a consumer. It's worth pointing out, though, that the tactic of appealing to nostalgia like this is not aimed at us, the enthusiasts. Sure, we can get excited about styling cues and references to cars that we loved, but we also care about what's under the hood. I mean, we care more about that than the average buyer. You know, the kind of person who, when you ask what kind of car they drive, they'll still say, a blue one. This new era of retrofuturism is an even harder pill for enthusiasts to swallow, because while the styling cues might be there, the underlying concept of an EV is so different from what we liked about those vehicles in the first place. In fact, we'd be much more nostalgic for technology rather than looks, and there's evidence to support that. Even though fewer and fewer new cars are being offered with a manual transmission, the number of manuals being sold has actually gone up. In 2021, J.D. Power reported that manuals made up less than 1% of total new cars sold in the US. By 2023, that number had climbed to 1.7%. Still a very, very small portion of the total. But when you think about the fact that interest in manuals doubled in 2 years, you begin to see how drastic the shift has been. And it's not just models with a history of being manual sports cars that are holding down the fort. Newer offerings like the Hyundai Elantra N and even the Toyota Tacoma pickup are still offered with a manual in the US. But there is a little danger to retrofuturism taking such a prominent position in an era, and that is what happens when people are nostalgic for retrofuturism itself. If the trend of this 40-year gap continues, then by 2040, OEMs will be doing throwback designs that reference the 2000s. How many of those will be cars that originally referenced the 60s? If we keep going with this idea of rehashing the past, then we're not creating a unique present, and slowly the retrofuturism snake eats its own tail. But there's another reason that this trend might not catch on, and it has more to do with the decades that are being emulated now. The mid-2000s retrofuturism boom targeted styles and aesthetics from the 1960s and older, and that is a very special time in automotive history, especially in the US. The 1960s was a peak when cars were most advanced before the interference of emissions and safety regulations. This is one of the reasons that we don't see 1970s revivals. American cars in particular were absolutely terrible in the 1970s. Almost every model made less horsepower than its counterpart from the previous decade. There is no nostalgia for the 1970s, or at least it's not strong enough to sell cars. The 1980s was a time of a strong visual aesthetic, and automotive technology was back on the rise after the introduction of fuel injection, variable valve timing, and advancements in forced induction. But still, for many people with enough financial security to be buying new cars, the 60s will always be the golden age. Take a look at the new Ford Bronco. After 25 years of being off the market, Ford launched the 6th-gen Bronco in 2021. Unlike its bigger, bulkier brethren of the early 90s, the new Ford Bronco was designed to emulate the original Bronco from 1965. They shortened the wheelbase of the two-door to 100 inches, making it only 8 inches longer than the original. Ford even digitally scanned a 60s Bronco to use as a reference when designing this new one. But these waves of inspiration aren't built just on nostalgia. I'm sure plenty of people who bought Chevy HHRs had no nostalgia whatsoever for mid-40s Suburbans. Sometimes a design team just finds inspiration that clicks. The 80s vibe seems to be clicking with the current market, and in a weird way, it seems fitting for the tech-centric EVs. The trend has expanded a little bit to gasoline vehicles too. The Tacoma is boxier than ever, just like the original Toyota pickup, but I don't think this trend will be as oversaturated as it was in the 2000s. Let me know what you think though. If 80s cars are going to be revived, what would you like to see a modern version of? And if American cars draw on nostalgia for the 60s, will we see a similar wave of Japanese cars of the 90s? There's a lot to think about here. We'll see what the next decade holds, and I'll see you in 2 weeks with another video. Thanks for watching. We got a wave of this in the mid-2000s. The S197 Mustang, the PT Cruiser, the Prowler, the SSR, HHR, SHSH, okay. The Prowler, the SSR, my God, SSR.